The cold metal of the chain brushed against the young girl's neck as the dawn fog slowly rose above the town square of the small mining town. The shadow of the gallows stretched long on the ground like a dark snake, ready to swallow another victim. But no one could have known that morning would become the bloodiest day in Deadwood's history when the man known as Black Bill crossed the town's borders. It was June 1873 when Susan Collins was sentenced to death in the town of Deadwood. The 18-year-old girl, with her golden hair and sea-blue eyes, stood under the gallows like an angel at Hell's Gate. Her face was porcelain-like, her gaze turned toward the sky as if waiting for help from above. Susan's story wasn't unusual in the Wild West. She grew up an orphan after losing her parents in a brutal Indian attack on the Nebraska frontier. She remembered the night when Sioux warriors struck the settlers' wagons. Her mother protected her with her body, while her father fought to his last breath to defend the family. Susan hid under a wagon, listening to the screams and the dull thuds of tomahawks. In the morning, a military patrol found her, the sole survivor of the bloodbath. At 12, she was taken in by the Martin family in Cheyenne. The wealthy cattle rancher, Elder Martin, was known as a strict but fair man. His wife had died 3 years earlier, leaving behind 2 sons. Susan's task became maintaining the huge ranch house and caring for the family. It was hard work for a child, but at least she had a roof over her head and food on the table. As the years passed, Susan's beauty blossomed. By 18, she was considered the most beautiful girl in the area. Her slender figure, golden hair, and kind smile turned many men's heads. Elder Martin spent increasingly more time near the girl and once announced he wanted to marry her. Susan refused, whereupon he threatened to throw her out of the house. That evening, the man died in his bedroom, allegedly from poisoning. Susan disappeared and everyone accused her of murder. According to the charges, Susan mixed arsenic into Elder Martin's evening tea when he made violent advances toward her. The man was found dead in his bed, and Susan vanished under the cover of night. She fled for 3 weeks, spending nights in forests and abandoned barns, hiding during the day. She was finally caught in Deadwood, where she worked at Rose Monroe's laundry. Rose took pity on the girl and harbored her, but someone recognized her and reported her to the sheriff. The trial lasted only 1 day in the packed Deadwood courthouse. The judge, Horace Wilkins, was notorious for hating women after his wife ran away with a traveling snake oil salesman. The evidence was convincing, though many believed it was fabricated. Thomas Martin, the elder son, was the main witness who, fighting back tears, described how he found his father dead and discovered the poison powder bottle among Susan's belongings. The jury reached their verdict after barely 20 minutes of deliberation: guilty. The judge scheduled the hanging for dawn, saying there was no point in wasting more food on a murderer. The town square slowly filled up. Some came out of curiosity, others to witness justice triumph. The saloons stayed open all night, and by dawn many were drunk. Women brought their children to see what happens to those who commit crimes. Some treated it like a picnic, with bread and cheese in their baskets. Death in Deadwood meant entertainment for the hardened miners and adventurers. The young sheriff, Robert Hayes, wasn't yet 30, but already commanded respect. He had previously served in the army and lost 2 fingers on his left hand at the Battle of Little Bighorn. He was the one who captured Susan, and now he supervised the execution. Not a muscle moved on his face, but his blue eyes revealed his inner struggle. Several people said he had talked to the girl in the cell late into the night. Some claimed they even saw a tear in his eye when he led Susan out of the cell. At exactly 5 in the morning, the bells of the town church began to toll. Susan wore a white dress given to her by the town priest. She climbed the stairs slowly, her legs trembling under the weight of fear. She didn't cry or beg. She remained dignified, even as the hangman, a dark-bearded man named Henry, wrapped the rope around her neck. An unusual silence fell over the crowd. Or perhaps it was the girl's beauty, or perhaps the strange dawn light, but many felt something wasn't right about this execution. Even the drunks fell silent, and children hid behind their mothers' skirts. The sheriff raised his hand, signaling they were ready. The hangman stepped to the trapdoor lever. Susan closed her eyes, her lips whispering a prayer. Her face was like a Renaissance painting of a martyr. At that moment, the shot rang out. It was so sharp and unexpected that many threw themselves to the ground, thinking an Indian attack had begun. The rope around Susan's neck snapped like a rotten string. The girl fell to her knees on the platform, gasping for air, with a red mark on her neck where the rope had been. At the edge of town stood a black rider, the barrel of his gun still smoking from the shot. His horse, a massive black stallion, shifted restlessly, as if sensing the tension in the air. William Cassidy, or as many knew him, Black Bill, had arrived in Deadwood, the most feared gunslinger, whose name was tied to 27 deaths. At least, according to the stories. Bill approached slowly, his horse's hoofbeats echoing in the stunned silence. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea before Moses. No one dared to meet his eyes, not even the sheriff. Bill wasn't particularly tall or frightening in appearance, but his gaze was as cold as the winter prairie. His leather hat pulled low over his eyes, his black leather jacket dusty from the long journey. When he reached the gallows, he dismounted and walked up the stairs. The wood creaked under his steps. Susan was still kneeling, trembling from shock and fear. Bill knelt beside her and gently lifted her chin to look into her eyes. Black Bill wasn't like the stories described him. He wasn't a giant. There were no scars on his face. He was a simple man, perhaps around 40, with deep lines around his eyes that came either from the sun or from worries. His eyes, however, were like those of a prairie wolf, piercing and merciless. Under his shoulder there was a mark of an old wound, a memory of an Indian arrow. "This girl is my bride." He said this in a voice that brooked no argument. He didn't shout it, nor whisper it. He simply stated it as an indisputable fact. In the crowd some laughed, others whispered. Everyone knew he was lying, but no one dared to tell him so. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand resting on his weapon. "Cassidy, this isn't your business," he said, though there was no trace of confidence in his voice. "You know the girl is here for murder." "Do what you must, Hayes," Bill replied, "but know that if she dies today, she won't be leaving this town alone." His words weren't spoken as a threat, but as a promise. Everyone knew he was capable of slaughtering the entire town if he felt like it. The next 5 minutes were the longest 5 minutes in Deadwood's history. The sheriff and the gunslinger stared each other down, while the town watched with bated breath. Finally, Hayes yielded. "Take her and be out of town by sunset," he said. "But if you ever return, the girl will hang, and you'll hang beside her." Bill helped Susan stand up, then took off his own coat and draped it over her shoulders. Then they went down the stairs, the man supporting the still trembling girl with his arm. The crowd made way for them. No one dared to stand in their path. Bill helped Susan onto his horse, then mounted behind her. He cast one last glance at the town, then spurred his horse and trotted north toward the Black Hills. However, this was not the end of the story, but only the beginning. Because as they left town, the Martin family's other son, Thomas, made a vow at his father's grave to take revenge. He wasn't as brave as his father, nor as strong as his brother, but he was cunning and patient. And although he might have feared Black Bill, the thirst for revenge was stronger than fear. Bill and Susan headed north toward the Black Hills, where the Indians' sacred land lay. Few ventured there, which made it a perfect sanctuary for them. The first night they camped beside a creek. The man made a fire and spread deerskin on the ground so the girl could rest comfortably. He roasted wild rabbit for dinner and even gave the girl some whiskey to help forget the day's horrors. Few words passed between them. Susan was still living in death's shadow, and Bill was never a man of words. The man stared into the fire, haunted by old memories that no one knew. Perhaps not even he fully understood. The next morning, the girl finally spoke. "Why did you do this?" she asked, gathering her courage to look into the man's eyes. "You don't even know me." "Why did you risk your life for a stranger?" Bill looked at the horizon for a long time before answering. The sunrise cast his face in golden light, softening his hard features. "I knew your father," he finally said. "James Collins was a brave man. He once saved my life during a Comanche attack when we both worked as scouts for the army. I promised him that if he ever needed me, I'd be there. When he died, I couldn't fulfill my promise. But now, I'm here." Susan's eyes welled with tears at the mention of her father. She barely remembered him, only the big strong hands and the soothing voice that sang lullabies to her in the evenings. "How did you know I was in trouble?" she asked while wiping away her tears. "I followed the Martin boy," Bill replied as he began saddling his horse. "I knew he was a bad person, but I didn't think he would go this far. When I heard they were accusing you of his murder, I knew it was a lie. He had been dead for 3 days when you allegedly poisoned him. I saw Thomas put the poison in his father's glass himself, after they argued about a piece of land his father wanted to sell." Susan's eyes widened in surprise. "So it wasn't me," she whispered, as if just now fully grasping her innocence. "No," said Bill, and for a moment what seemed like a smile crossed his face. "You are innocent, and I will prove it." In the following weeks, Bill and Susan traveled in hiding, through the mountains along Indian trails, avoiding larger settlements. The man taught the girl how to shoot, make fire, and track. All the things she might need to survive in the Wild West. Sometimes they scavenged food from abandoned farms, or Bill hunted so they would have something to eat. Slowly they got to know each other, and although neither said it, a deep bond began to form between them. And as they traveled, Susan learned that most of Bill's legend was exaggeration. He hadn't killed 27 people, only 8, and all in self-defense. He didn't enjoy killing. He was just very good at it. He once worked as a scout for the Army and once for the Pinkerton Agency, but neither lasted long. Bill was the kind of man who couldn't stand restrictions. In late September, they arrived at a small mountain settlement, Silverton, where silver mines had been opened in the mountains. Bill's old friend, a doctor named Marcus, lived here. They had fought together in the war, and Marcus owed Bill his life. He was the only one Bill trusted. Marcus helped them hide while Bill returned to Deadwood to find evidence of Susan's innocence. The girl protested, fearing for the man's safety, but Bill was adamant. He wanted to serve justice and couldn't keep running anymore. He had lived in the shadows for too long, he said. Much had changed in Deadwood since then. Thomas Martin became the town's new sheriff after Hayes disappeared under mysterious circumstances. People said he lost his life during an Indian attack, but his body was never found. The mine discovered a new gold vein, and the town grew faster than ever. New buildings were erected, and more women and children arrived, civilizing the wild mining town. Bill moved cautiously, like a shadow. He hid during the day and worked at night. He talked to old acquaintances, bribed some drunks, watched the Martin house, and slowly pieced together the puzzle. Elder Martin had actually died by his own son Thomas's hand. The younger brother was jealous because his father always considered him second best. When the father announced he would marry Susan, it was the last straw. Thomas killed his father and staged the scene to frame Susan. Bill obtained evidence, a letter Thomas wrote to a friend detailing his plan. The letter was hidden in a saloon's back room under a loose floorboard, but before he could leave town, he was ambushed. Thomas's men were waiting for him in the hotel room, The shootout was short and brutal. Bill killed 3 men but was shot multiple times himself. A bullet pierced his shoulder, but he still managed to escape through the window. With severe injuries, he dragged himself out of town, knowing he would surely die if he stayed. 3 days passed before he returned to Silverton. By then, he was barely alive. His wounds were infected, and he was tormented by high fever. Marcus did everything he could, but the wounds were too severe. Bill handed the letter to Susan and told her what he had learned. With his last strength, he asked the girl to flee far away and start a new life. Susan didn't leave his bedside, held his hand, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and sang softly to him, songs she had learned from her father. Bill smiled and said he could now see James Collins's daughter. She was just as brave. Susan was holding his hand when Bill took his last breath. The most feared gunslinger died as he lived, alone, but not without purpose. Susan buried Bill in the mountains, under a pine tree where you could see the valley. She placed a simple wooden cross without a name, as the man had requested. She didn't want anyone to find and desecrate his grave. She didn't flee as Bill had told her. Instead, she returned to Deadwood, alone but not without fear. She didn't give the letter to the sheriff, but to the town's newspaper. The truth spread quickly, like fire. Thomas Martin was arrested that same evening. The trial this time was real, the evidence undeniable. Thomas Martin ended up on the same gallows where Susan had almost died. Susan Collins never married. She was awarded part of the Martin estate as compensation, and she founded a school for orphan girls. People soon forgot that she was once almost hanged, and knew her only as the teacher who never smiled and always wore black, as if mourning someone. Few knew the truth about the young girl and the feared gunslinger who gave his life for her. But their story endured, whispered around campfires like a legend of love, sacrifice, and redemption in the cruel land of the Wild West. And if one listens carefully, even today one can hear the gun blast in the dawn's gray light that cut the rope and changed 2 people's fate forever.